Now, Lyndon Johnson had gained the presidency at first because the President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. But in the election of 1964, Johnson had to run for president on his own. And so in this election, Johnson was victorious over Barry Goldwater, who was a conservative who opposed civil rights. The election signaled a shift. Okay, there's a shift going on of Southern Democrats moving to the Republican Party. Okay, as the Republican Party began to cater to the portion of America that disagreed with the direction of the New Deal and civil rights legislation. Okay, so keep in mind that many Southerners were Democrats. Okay, that was their party. They dominated the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party starts moving in a different direction because the Democratic Party begins to support the New Deal during the Great Depression, and then later on, the Democratic Party will go on to support civil rights. Okay, with, like we were saying earlier, the passing of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. Okay, so as the Democratic Party began to support civil rights, many Southern Democrats start to move and shift over to the Republican Party. Okay, so things are changing there in the political parties. Now, as president, Johnson's program was known as the Great Society. Okay, so this is his program. And the program moved in a similar direction as the New Deal and Truman's Fair Deal as well. So they're similar in the sense that government spending was directed towards programs that supported the citizenry along the lines of like the welfare states of Europe. Okay, but it's not as progressive as the welfare states of Europe, but still you have government spending going to the people, okay, trying to support the poor, trying to bring about some degree of equality in society. So Johnson had pushed for medical programs, Medicaid, Medicare, to provide health care for the poor and the elderly. Okay, so it's this program, the Great Society. This is Johnson's big program. He's trying to make a change, and Medicaid and Medicare are part of this program. This is where we see those come about. Okay. Another aspect of the Great Society was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Okay, and basically this act provided federal funding to schools, both elementary and secondary schools. Okay, so now you see Johnson putting some funding towards education. All right, so government's getting involved in supporting education. The Hart-Celler Act. This is an act that ended the quota system in U.S. immigration policy. Remember, we had talked about the quota system where only a certain number of individuals could immigrate from specific countries to the United States. Okay, well, that quota system is going to be ended with the Hart-Celler Act. So under the quota system, specific countries were restricted in terms of the number of immigrants that could come from those countries, right? So Asian countries were barred from immigration altogether during that time. The number of immigrants from Southern and Eastern European countries were also very limited under the quota system. But after the passage of the Hart-Celler Act, the number of immigrants from Asia and from Africa and Latin America increased dramatically. Okay, so the Hart-Celler Act has a big impact on where immigrants are coming to the United States, right? So you see a boost in immigration coming from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. President Johnson also called for a war on poverty, okay, trying to bring about a degree of equality, right? So he sought to end poverty through training programs and through education and scholarships and housing programs, and also some financial support, right, like food stamps. But mostly, the idea was to provide poor people with the skills and the motivation to get better jobs. And that was supposed to end poverty, right? So he didn't want to just give out money to the poor or give out government jobs directly to the poor, right? He wants to promote skills, job skills, and motivate people through education to try to, so that they go out and get better jobs on their own, okay? But the war on poverty did lead to food stamps. Okay, so you do have some type of financial support for the poor. Okay, so the war on poverty led to food stamps as a form of direct economic aid to the poor. Okay, so overall, even though the program did help to reduce poverty, all right, there was some success there. It did not end poverty. Okay, a number of race riots, such as the Watts riot in Los Angeles, those occurred in the mid to late 1960s in minority neighborhoods, partially due to joblessness because of racial discrimination and poverty. Okay, so obviously the war on poverty is not completely successful. It's like, yes, you could offer some job training programs, you could offer some education, scholarships, things like that, but still, a lot of people are out of work, a lot of people are unemployed, and it's not just because the jobs aren't there, but it's because of racial discrimination. Okay, so you start to see race riots taking place, for example, throughout the country, but for example, in Los Angeles, right? The Watts riot. Martin Luther King, he criticized the war on poverty, right? He said basically that there's not nearly enough funding being put into the war on poverty to make any kind of significant difference. Okay, so yes, there's some criticism coming from the civil rights movement on Johnson's war on poverty, which was an aspect of his Great Society program. While nonviolence signified the essence of Martin Luther King's approach to civil rights, others grew tired of the image of helpless activists being brutalized by racists. Speakers like Malcolm X of the Nation of Islam promoted the idea of using violence if necessary to protect oneself while in the pursuit of equality, right, and trying to gain civil rights. Unlike Martin Luther King, Malcolm did not call for the acceptance or recognition of equal rights by the white establishment. Instead, he supported the idea of self-determination for African Americans, which the Nation of Islam referred to as a nation within a nation. Okay, so self-determination means making economic decisions for yourself, making political decisions for yourself, right? Being a nation within a nation. This meant controlling the economy, controlling the politics within the African American community. Okay, separatism instead of integration, which was what Martin Luther King was calling for, integration, right? Martin Luther King had wanted white America to accept African Americans and recognize that they should have equal rights. But Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam were like, no, we don't need acceptance. We're going to do things ourselves. Right, we're going to have our own communities. We're going to manage our own economy and our own politics within our communities. We're going to be like a nation within a nation. Now, later, after Malcolm X had made his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, as all Muslims are supposed to do, he supported interracial cooperation. Okay, so he's kind of changing his perspective. Why? Because when he was there in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, he saw that there were Muslims of all races, okay? And this new perspective clashed with the message of the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm X eventually left the organization. He was later assassinated while giving a speech in New York. Other organizations began to support a degree of separatism from whites as well, such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and also the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. Okay, they had previously been interracial organizations, but they start to change as the direction in the civil rights movement starts to change towards separatism and move towards separatism. To some, it seemed like white civil rights activists were trying to take over the movement. So that's why they wanted to separate from them. In the 1960s, some African-American civil rights activists began to promote the idea of Black power. The concept implied a sense of racial pride, as well as the call for African-American independence, not just civil rights, but true power. right? The right to control their own community, the right to elect African-American politicians and African-American officials, and in some cases, separatism, okay? They supported separatism, like the message of the Nation of Islam, okay? So you start to see a shift in the direction of the civil rights movement. The Black Panthers are also a group that was moving in the direction of a more militant type of civil rights protests. The Black Panthers were a militant organization that was established in Oakland, California. But eventually, the Black Panthers had spread with chapters in other parts of the country as well. The Panthers utilized the right to bear arms, okay, the Second Amendment, meaning they had guns and they were confronting the cops while armed, okay? They spoke out publicly about police brutality, and they even patrolled African-American neighborhoods in an effort to stop police harassment. The Panthers sought to uplift the African-American community through programs like the Free Breakfast Program, which offered free breakfast for children in the neighborhood. They also promoted the establishment of schools and health clinics in the African-American community. But ultimately, the Panthers organization went into decline as local authorities, as well as the FBI, used several tactics to take them down, such as planting spies in their organization. The Panthers also got into armed conflicts with local authorities as well, and that also contributed to the decline of the organization. But even after the decline of the Panthers, some former Panthers had success in politics, okay, such as Bobby Rush, who was elected to Congress.